Community was pretty good, right? One might even say streets ahead.
Stop trying to coin the phrase streets ahead.
No, you know what, Jeff? You're wrong. Pierce was cooking with that one. Anyway, a while back, I had the idea for a project analyzing the first episode of each of Community's 6 seasons, focusing in on each premiere to get to the heart of how they laid the blueprint for each season, how these first episodes reflect the various changes in identity and philosophy the show would go through over its 6-year run, and why these episodes did or didn't work. In other words, if they're, say it with me, streets ahead. A year and a bit later, with the release of this video, that project is complete. Initially, the idea was to release these as standalone videos, and that's what I had been doing. Much, though certainly not all, of the material in this video has been released in little chunks over the months, but a while back, one viewer suggested I compile it all together at the end. And that's what this is. I've gathered together every released video in the Streets Ahead series, trimmed and streamlined introductions and conclusions, and I've of course included a final all-new segment on the Season 6 premiere, as well as an original conclusion. If you are a long-time Pillar of Garbage viewer and you want to jump around to just the new stuff, I've put timecodes in the description to make that as easy as possible, but if you're new here, or if you've only seen 1 or 2 of my community videos before, grab a cup of tea and settle in. Let's get started. Part 1. Why Community's pilot was streets ahead. Season 1, Episode 1 then. Community. The pilot. To start with, I want to take a brief look at this episode in isolation, to separate these 22 minutes from everything that followed, to appraise it on its own terms. And on its own terms, this is a very solid episode of television. Even if lots of it changed throughout the following episodes and seasons, the characterization of this core cast is razor sharp right out the gate. We see a lot more of Jeff's perspective here, so his is the character we get to know and understand most by the time the credits roll, but as soon as the surprise study group sequence begins and the rest of the Greendale 7 introduce themselves, we immediately get a crystal clear picture of who they are, and of the less than harmonious group dynamic that's likely to emerge.
Children get pity, but not respect, and adults, they get respect, but they also get the back of their head grabbed and their face pushed through jukeboxes.
Okay.
On the other hand, we've got the Jeff Duncan stuff, the scenes which really propel the narrative forward, and this is a genuinely interesting story. Thematically, it's pretty rich. Jeff, who seems to be this totally amoral weasel, able to scurry away from any problem, any issue, gets caught in a situation with no easy exit. And the way he deals with this, or rather, the way he kind of can't deal with it without beginning to change, that's a home run for me. Self-sufficiency, lonerism, these are fine if you've got cheat codes, if you've got an ability to cut corners. But when that falls apart, well, fancy that. Community becomes necessary. It becomes more than just a lie, spun to impress the blonde from Spanish class. When your pedestal, your head start, your leg up disappears, you fall right back down with the rest of us, and you realize that this togetherness is all you've got, is the only way you can stand a chance in the rat race. And I think that's an observation which rings equally true, whether that rat race is a community college or the world outside of one. So that's the pilot in isolation, considered apart from the monumental legacy of the show that followed. But we only get so much from an isolated approach. So I want to start thinking about the pilot with the show's future in mind. That's the main reason I wanted to make this video actually, because I think there's far more continuity here between the pilot and the show's eventual form than has often been granted. The conventional wisdom around the Community pilot is that the character stuff's pretty sharp, it's funny, its charm just about outweighs its cynicism, yada yada yada, but that the more conceptual, more meta sensibilities that the show would become known for are nowhere to be seen here. That the Community pilot is content just being TV. That it's not really interested in questioning or playing with its own medium. An example of this sort of view is Captain Midnight's video on the Community pilot, which suggests that Community's wacky meta future is hard to see here. The good captain notes there's references aplenty in the pilot, but no premonitions of the show's more conceptual side.
There's nothing here that suggests just how crazy this would get later on.
And look, I really like Captain Midnight, and I'm not even saying I disagree with his video more broadly, but I will say that this is an area where my take is sort of incompatible with his. Because to me, Community's pilot is already doing this, already displaying an early version of that proclivity towards homage, already telling its story through a pop cultural point of reference. Community went on to do a Star Wars, to do a Ken Burns documentary, and to do a Goodfellas. Here, in the pilot, it's doing a Breakfast Club. Sure, a lot of the pilot was apparently inspired by Dan Harmon's own life. His experiences taking a Spanish class in a community college, and making some unlikely friends along the way, but the choice to create in this pilot a crucible of friendship forming, set in a library, a situation where this diverse cast is brought together and pressure cooked into a real connected community across one day? I mean, I didn't go to school with Harmon, so I guess I can't say definitively that something like this never happened to the guy, but come on. That's Breakfast Club. That's almost certainly where he lifted the general outline of this premise from. And yeah, in case any of you haven't seen the pilot in a hot minute, this isn't some spurious link I've come up with myself. Breakfast Club is openly referenced here, like a bunch.
This is kind of like Breakfast Club, huh?
We are in a library.
It was a banner year at the Bender family. I got a carton of cigarettes. The old man grabbed me and said, "Hey, smoke up, Johnny!" "No, Dad, what about you?"
Well, that actually was from the Breakfast Club.
The Breakfast Club homage is lampshaded, sure, but that act of lampshading doesn't nullify the fact that there is some sort of homage or reception here, and that it ends up having a pretty big impact on the pilot. That impact is what I want to move on to now, because I don't just want to point out a couple of superficial similarities here and say, like, hey, this thing is kind of like that thing, it's a reference, that means it's good and clever. No, I think the pilot's reception of that 80s classic goes a little deeper. I think that this pilot, and to some extent the show as a whole, is offering an answer of sorts to a question that people have been asking about The Breakfast Club ever since it first came out. What, if anything, remains of the links these detention buds have formed when school starts again on the Monday? The film itself seems to feel that this company will dissolve utterly once each member returns to his or her previous place in the school hierarchy. But the film itself is never quite certain, and this is a question that stayed with audiences throughout the years. And I'm not for one moment saying I dislike the approach that film took. I think it speaks powerfully to just how savage teenage social politics are. But I do like the way Community flippity-flops that film's sentiment with the pilot's ending. The whole necessity of community thing we touched on earlier. Because the school here isn't just a backdrop, it's a school. Jeff now has to actually work to pass, and he can't do it by himself. In the pilot then, perhaps unlike Breakfast Club, school isn't just detention, and abstracted ideas of cliques and hierarchies, or different lifestyles and backgrounds. School is classes, studying, tests, collaboration, or at least, since this is just the pilot, the foreknowledge of them. On a basic level, connection is needed, otherwise Jeff's screwed. And maybe the others are too, albeit in less visible ways. Maybe today, maybe at a community college somewhere near you, maybe the Breakfast Club, maybe a Breakfast Club would stay friends. Why not, right? And the ending's one thing, but for the rest of the episode, if we are to read the pilot through this Hughesian lens, Jeff, of course, takes the role of the vice principal, Vernon, the one responsible for putting this misfit found family in the library and keeping them there. And that kind of fits. While Jeff's our protagonist in this pilot, he is a bit of a scumbag. It's to Harmon's credit that the pilot is able to inject just enough pathos to keep Jeff just about in the audience's sympathy, despite the way he manipulated these people. If we are to read the pilot as, in part, a reception of The Breakfast Club, then this, the borderline villainy of Jeff Winger, surely exists, again in part, as a response to that earlier character. This curious balance of good and bad in Jeff is something the show returns to time and time again, and something which doesn't even come close to being resolved until the latter half of Community's run. That's one of the reasons I think this aspect of the pilot needs more recognition. The way that barely visible dimensions of that Breakfast Club reception do have real knock-on effects on the show Community would grow into. And hey, maybe this is a bit of a reach. It's obviously not a total fit for a lot of reasons, but that's what I get from this. And I'm pretty sure most of it is intentional. And that's why I think that even in this very first episode, the seeds of Community's insane, conceptual, sometimes experimental future are clearly sown already. The last point I want to make about Community's first episode is that this was the first time that a mass audience had seen Dan Harmon's work, his particular identity. Harmon had been around at this point for like a decade, writing for projects, some of which found cult success, but the Community pilot was really the first time a wider audience had heard Harmon's distinctive voice. And it comes through so clearly. As the pilot, this is one of the most direct, unfiltered visions of Harmon's writing we'd see throughout the show's run. Being mostly Community showrunner, Harmon always had a big hand in the show's production, but most of the time there were plenty of other writers, other voices in the mix after this point. This, though, is as near to unfiltered Harmon as we ever saw at Greendale. The little pop cultural potshots scattered throughout everyday life, which everyone gets and has an opinion on.
We can sympathize with a pencil, we can forgive a shark, and we can give Ben Affleck an Academy Award for screenwriting.
Big mistake.
The baseline sense of annoyance at life's semi-meaningless social rituals.
Not so good at the small talk.
Yeah, I like big talk. What's your deal?
That's not small talk?
What's your deal, and is God dead?
The bitingly sharp one-liners.
Are you familiar with the adage, cheaters never prosper?
No. And if I wanted to learn something, I wouldn't have come to community college.
This is all Harmon to a T. Even in smaller moments, there's hints of ideas which would go on to reoccur again and again in Harmon's work. The open fictionality of national myth.
When you made that U-turn on the freeway and tried to order chalupas from the emergency call box, that your only real crime was loving America.
Or the way everything always comes back to family.
He's a U.S. citizen, he's not a threat to national security or anything. A lot of people want to know that after they meet him because he has an angry energy. But not like angry at America, just angry at my mom for leaving him.
That's something which always stands out to me whenever I come back to this pilot. How idiosyncratic it all feels. The dialogue, the story, the ideas. Take that Shark Week bit. The way profundity is located within the most banal, superficial trappings of modern culture, and the way that profundity is just a moment later undercut entirely.
What about the look left speech?
Made it up. That's what I do. I make things up, and I got paid a lot of money to do it before I came to this school-shaped toilet.
If you've seen the rest of this show, if you've seen Rick and Morty or Harmontown, or any of the other countless projects Harmon's had a hand in, I'd wager moments like these and the pilot's wider sense of this uneasy balance between cynicism and meaning feel very familiar. These harmonisms tend to come through most strongly in Jeff and Abed. Jeff's almost successful defense of his nihilistic outlook is, in a sense, the harbinger of a certain Rick Sanchez, and like that later character, feels at times like Harmon's trying to convince himself that there's some accuracy here more than he's trying to convince the audience.
I discovered at a very early age that if I talk long enough, I could make anything right or wrong. So either I'm God or truth is relative.
Abed's the other side of the coin, the eternal, compulsive believer in the power of fiction, of culture, of television. There's a sort of truth around us at all times, Abed seems to counter. All you have to do to access it is turn on a television set and tune in. I think it's been said before, though I'm not sure by who, that whenever we see these two characters interacting, it's like we're seeing one part of Harmon talking to another. And that rings true here, just as it does all the way into season 6. That's another key distinguishing element of Community that carries through right till the end that's clearly visible here at the beginning. And that's the main takeaway I think I've got for you here. Yes, Community grew immensely beyond the bounds set out by its pilot. Yes, even when considering season 1 alone, the second episode, Spanish 101, the first produced after NBC picked up this pilot, is probably more representative of the show we'd go on to have, introducing as it does the sets and characters which should round out this setting. But I think all the best bits of Community, the weirdness, the wit, the intertextuality, it is all here, right from the start. Just maybe not in the exact same configuration that later episodes, later seasons would develop. Part 2. How Anthropology 101 changed Community. Community changed, like a fair bit. Across a few short years, the NBC sitcom's identity shifted from a witty, referential, slice-of-life collegiate sitcom to, well, not that.
So sad what happened here all those centons ago.
So sad.
So preventable.
I'm Space Elder Britta.
Perhaps the most pivotal point in this shift was the show's second season, the year in which the show's exploratory proclivities grew from the occasional homage episode into a regular pattern of formal experimentation, in episodes like Advanced D&D and Intermediate Documentary Filmmaking, and episodes running with truly off-the-wall ideas, like messianic myths and ancient peoples or paradigms of human memory. Fans tend to take this widening of ambition for granted, like it was the only way things could have gone, but that's retrospect talking. This change wasn't guaranteed, and it wasn't automatic. It had to be made. But how does a shift like this happen? How do you change a show? That's the question I want to try and answer here by looking at the first episode of Season 2, Anthropology 101, an episode which is, in many ways, the bridge between that more grounded, more conventional Season 1 and that transitional sophomore year. There's a lot of more obvious ways in which this episode pushes things forward. Instantly familiar dynamics are introduced here, like Jeong as an unstable villain, as opposed to simply being a bit of a prick.
I told you they hate you.
No, they said they just needed more time.
In following up Season 1's Spanish 101, Anthropology 101 also doubles down on that first episode as Subject 101 conceit, cementing the pattern that the show would follow until the eventual repilot. Anthropology 101 does feel, in a good way, like Community trying on hats. Like a dry run for concepts, the show would eventually spin out into full episodes. We see a harbinger of the evil Jeff dynamic later episodes would at times embrace. We see a mini version of that whole group angrily spilling secrets in the study room then imploding shtick that the show would go on to use so fruitfully in episodes like Cooperative Calligraphy and Cooperative Polygraphy. There are hints of this in Season 1, of course, but the stuff we see in Anthropology 101 does feel more like the prototype for those later episodes. We also see the writers and the cast become painfully, hilariously aware of the fact that the Jeff-Britta relationship isn't endgame, isn't close, and is indeed kind of the worst outcome possible for everyone involved.
It begins. The greatest relationship ever known.
That's an idea which would, of course, resurface years later.
Let's get married.
What?
Yeah, right? I mean, this is what matters, isn't it?
But it isn't just shades of Community's future we can see in Anthropology 101. Change isn't just bringing new stuff in, it's also choosing which existing elements to jettison. When I started thinking about making this video, I kept coming back to something I'd read years ago. Looking back for it now, I think it must have been this post on earnthis.net. I may have mentally mashed it up with a couple of other reviews, maybe a Reddit thread or two, but when I was thinking about the way Season 2 opens, I kept thinking about the way Season 1 ends twice. The way various critics and bloggers back in the day had observed that Season 1's finale, Pascal's Triangle Revisited, was almost upstaged by the preceding episode, English as a Second Language. The penultimate episode felt final too, felt conclusive, but it didn't lean so hard on the melodrama. It summed up that other side of Season 1, the paintball side, the Goodfellas side, the buddy side. It bought into that parodic, satirical impulse, not just recognizing lampshading tropes, but exploring them, deflating them a little more. I think in these two episodes, these twin finales, we saw the show laying out two possible blueprints for its future. From its very start, Community was a show at an awkward, ironic distance from the sitcom form. It loved the genre openly, but it could never bring itself to embrace that genre fully, uncritically, unabashedly. Pascal's Triangle Revisited is, I think, the nearest it ever came to this. Tropes are acknowledged, but with a knowing, accepting smile. The episode luxuriates in this manufactured schmaltz, and for a moment, just a moment, it almost seems to forget that ironic distance. This is one vision of the show Community could have become, or I guess continued to be. A development of that balance Season 1 struck between more grounded, more emotional stories, with a tendency toward in-text recognition of the way those stories worked, but erring on the former side, keeping the love triangles, the relationship subplots, the will they won't they. The previous episode, English as a Second Language, it isn't really that different, but it's different enough. There's schmaltz here, but we don't soak in it, we puncture it.
Oh, don't worry about me. I can only connect with people through movies.
She's the Ark of the Covenant!
So that same balance is here, but it leans the other way. The emotionality isn't the end, isn't the goal, it's a tool. Our real concerns are more detached, more intellectual, more meta. In this episode's story, Annie is, in essence, fighting to keep the concept of the show alive for a second season.
We're a Spanish study group, so we'd keep taking Spanish together.
That's what I thought too, Annie.
And Jeff, still our protagonist at this point, is trying to destroy that concept, return to reality on an expedited schedule. And the Spanish class? Yeah, that was never real.
I faked my way into a job as a Spanish teacher at a community college, relying on phrases from Sesame Street.
Oh my God.
And so on. Returning to Season 2, returning to Anthropology 101, if those twin finales did mark two departure points, two possible routes for the show's future, I think it's clear Community picked the template laid out by English as a second language here. For one, it steps directly towards the goofy, away from the realism, the slice of life quality which retrospectively distinguishes Season 1. And that's a trend the rest of the season doubles down on. Moreover, the episode explicitly abandons those mushier ideas and tones Pascal's Triangle Revisited brought in. Slater's gone, obviously, and halfway through watching Anthro 101, the idea that Britta and Jeff could be together, could genuinely love each other is laughable. Literally, it's played for laughs. The Annie-Britta conflict in the episode's latter half plays like a demented parody of the dynamic this show's previous episode had played mostly straight.
Will you marry me?
Yeah, of course.
It's actually quite impressive how efficiently and how totally the Season 2 premiere demolishes those sentimental remnants. The emptiness of the Jeff-Britta power struggle, combined with this second season's eagerness to let Abed get meta, means the warm fuzzies are flushed away in minutes.
Britta's Marianne Jeffrey Winger!
What the hell is this?
A wedding episode.
Oh my god! You slept with her and then kissed me? What?
That move takes the tonal template we saw in English as a second language and supercharges it, laying the groundwork for the 25 episodes to follow. And this isn't to say that Anthropology 101, Season 2, or even English as a second language for that matter, abandons sentiment. It doesn't. They don't. In every case, we resolve on a return to sentiment, to emotion. But that sentiment isn't straightforward or uncomplicated. It isn't external, it isn't imported in with the tropes, the love triangles, the will they, won't they. That's the hollow sentiment we see mocked in Anthro 101, and indeed throughout Season 2. The sentiment Community always comes back to, that it embraces after the shallow, the superficial is dismissed, it arises after all that tropey framework's been set up, used and abandoned. It blossoms in the resulting weird, zany hodgepodge. It coexists with the bizarre, the surreal, the goofy.
And without each other, we'll go extinct. And that's a fact.
But that's all a bit abstract, right? So let's move on to one last point. One last thing Anthropology 101 does to change Community, to push this show into the thing it had become. We've talked a lot here about the way this episode exists in a complex relationship with the show's past, particularly that Season 1 finale, and that wasn't just a stray observation on my part. No, I think it's key here, because it shows us the final thing I think this episode does to push Community forwards. What this episode does is take that parodic, satirical impulse the show had right from the start and turn it inward, ripping on that past schmaltz in the way earlier episodes had jabbed at Dead Poets Society or RoboCop.
I guess it's just a bad day for drug-dealing terrorists, and a good day for Kick Puncher.
Season 1 was self-aware, of course it was, but not to this extent, and not in such a pointed way. So if nothing else, what the Season 2 premiere does, the biggest way it changes things, is by extending that whole Pomo nothing is sacred, playfully cynical attitude to cover itself. nothing is forbidden. Everything is fair game for pastiche, for mockery, for intellectual scavenge. And I think there's a fairly direct link between this move and the way subsequent Season 2 episodes like Messianic Myths and Ancient Peoples get conceptual without any regard for the viewers this might lose, and also to the way this episode can really dive to unprecedented depths in the our characters actually aren't great people well.
Let me explain it to you. Men are monsters who crave young flesh. The end.
This might all sound pessimistic, but here, for Community's second season and everything that followed, this sense of abandon is liberating. So how did Community shift from the witty realism of Season 1 to the zany, unrestrained pastiche we saw in later years? How do you change a show? Well, to a point, you don't. You just stop doing the things that don't work so well and double down on what does. They say writing is easy, you just have to cross out the wrong words, and same principle. You readjust, you commit. And in a way, that principle does cover that bigger, more seismic shift we see in Season 2, in Anthropology 101 too. The way Community starts to treat even itself with a qualified irreverence. Because that irreverence was always there, it just wasn't total, wasn't self-effacing until this point. I don't want to oversell this shift. Season 2, including its premiere, is a bridge to the show's more absurd side, but it isn't some instant warp there. More than anything, this whole sophomore year is a transition. We do still get more Season 1 type episodes, school life episodes, the type we stopped getting so much in Seasons 3, 5, and 6. But it's such a fun period of this show's run precisely because of this. It goes from grounded to wild in a way no other season does. Our characters are no longer the archetypes they started as, but they haven't become caricatures yet, looking at you, Britta. It's when Community started to really know what it was, but also what it wanted to become. So yeah, Season 2, Anthropology 101, and the way that episode ushers in this new era, the way it knows what works, knows how to double down on that, and knows not to hold itself back, it's streets ahead. Part 3, Biology 101 and the Cost of Community's Greatness. Ask any Community fan when the beloved NBC sitcom was at its most ambitious, when it cemented its identity and legacy, when it cranked out some of the best and most interesting episodes of broadcast TV in recent memory, and you'll most likely hear the same answer, repeated again and again. Season 3. This is when the show really started swinging for the fences, consistently. The cast had fully figured out their characters, the writers had figured out how they all fit together, and Community had become fully committed to exploring the weirdest, most outre aspects of its identity. But that isn't to say that this season, these episodes, are universally beloved. That side of things is what I'm interested in today. Was there a downside to this new, wackiest approach? Did the show pay a price to enter this imperial period? This time we're jumping into Season 3 with Biology 101.
Abed has a new favorite TV show, Jeff. It's called Inspector Spacetime.
Can it, boobs?
It's a memorable episode, but not everyone's the biggest fan of it, as it turns out, and as such, I think it's a telling microcosm of this season, of the show's most interesting period. Biology 101 picks up after the two-part Season 2 finale, which saw Pierce finally leave the group after his villain arc. Now, he's back. Or so it seems. Everyone but Jeff is ready to accept him, but since he couldn't get a place in biology, Jeff manages to keep him out of the study group proper.
Pierce! We'll see you when we see you.
This is all fine and dandy until Jeff himself gets kicked out of biology, letting Pierce in, and the tables are turned. Jeff gets a taste of being the outsider, to a degree he never had before, and this experience, combined with some unexpected chemical assistance, leads to a bust-up of legendary proportions.
I've become agitated. I apologize.
It seems like that's the nail in the coffin, that Jeff's finally out for good, only for something truly unexpected to happen. Pierce takes the fall for Jeff's deranged behavior, takes the prestige hit to bring things back to normal. And that's basically it. Along the way, we're introduced to Inspector Spacetime, as well as Vice Dean Laybourne and Professor Kane, in my eyes, two of the show's best guest characters. And speaking of the new, this episode kickstarts a lot of the fresh dynamics the third season would embrace, alongside Jim Rash Rash's promotion to series regular, the Dean's got a meteor role, he's a perspective character here, and the little story he gets is the prelude to that whole aircon repair school story that's one of this season's through lines. Similarly, we get to see the start of the Chang villain arc, and Brit is just an idiot now. Season 3! But beyond the more obvious stuff, the setup, the shifts in characterization, Biology 101 also gives us a look under the hood of Season 3. What's driving the show this time around? And we see this from minute 1 in the song. I can't just play you the whole thing, because the studios that own the rights to programs like this tend not to understand fair use very well, so I'll have to play it to you in chunks, but this is how the episode starts.
We're gonna fly to school each morning. We're gonna smile the entire time.
We're gonna be more happy. We're gonna finally be fine.
Now, in the episode, this song is Jeff's vision of the prospect of a year without Pierce.
Jeff,
Oh, sorry. What was the question?
what are we gonna do without Pierce in the study group this year?
But the sequence plays another function. In opening the premiere, opening the season of a show which had struggled with numbers, in a musical sequence pledging conformity, promising facetiously to dial the weird back, stay normal, stay fun,
We're gonna seem like a mainstream dream and be appealing to all mankind. We're gonna have more fun and be less weird than the first 2 years combined.
the episode gestures toward the audience, toward the show's reception and consumption, and from the way Biology 101 pushes back against this pressure to be normal, lambasts it, you can sort of detect how keenly this pressure was being felt. Whether that pressure, those expectations came from the network, the audience, or the minds of the writers themselves, the message here is clear. Community's not giving in. Toward the end of the episode, this is all made rather explicit.
I just came by to tell everyone this year isn't gonna be that different.
The Dean's story this episode functions as a sort of continuation of that opening song. His new prim, proper, and economically minded persona utterly defeated by a series of increasingly odd, increasingly expensive, increasingly invincible obstacles.
You bring your head down to my appendage tomorrow, and I'll show you what's up.
To see it all come crashing down is cathartic and sets the tone for the year to follow. You want Greendale to get normal, to chill out and be happy? Yeah, no. Here's an episode about monkey gas hallucinogenics, axe rampages, and secret AC repair schools, and it only gets weirder and darker after this. In the episodes to follow, that original slice of life collegiate flavor was replaced increasingly with high-concept rigmarole, dice roll-determined parallel timelines, Christmas-themed body snatchers sing-alongs, wartime documentary spoofs, 8-bit adventures, and so much more, like a whole bunch more, including a very self-conscious, self-congratulatory obsession with telling you that this is the darkest year yet.
The semester's been so long and dark and angry.
Anyway, on that weirdness. This whole thing is a trend, not a total shift. It is still the same show, but as trends go, it's a fairly clear one. Much digital ink has been spilled on the weirdness, the absurdity, the experimental nature of Season 3, so I don't want to spend too long arguing for something most of you are already well aware of, but if you want a pithy summation of this shift, how's this? Community suspended its disbelief in itself. Community started to commit to wild ideas without worrying so much about keeping those ideas grounded, or about having its characters react realistically to those ideas. Classic episodes like Virtual Systems Analysis or Regional Holiday Music, for instance, only work if we play along. It isn't just that wacky events occur to a degree we'd not seen before, even in the paintball episodes, the claymation special, it's that characters do not react to those wacky occurrences in realistic ways. And we see that here in Biology 101. Despite featuring some classic moments, despite kicking off this beloved period, a good deal of fans don't love this one. Posts, comments, takes like this one aren't uncommon online when Bio 101 comes up, the major complaint being the way the group reacts to Jeff's desperate antics. After all, Pierce is welcomed back with open arms after having done way worse stuff way more. And so the harshness of moments like this feels abrupt and unearned.
What you did, it's hard to get past that. I know you're already out of the study group, but I'm gonna have to ask that you stop being my friend.
Similarly, being kicked out of biology for an annoyingly loud phone does seem pretty manufactured, but I don't think this is some unique failure in this episode's writing. No, to me, it's simply an instance of that season 3 dynamic. The episode has an idea, creating and exploring this Jeff Pierce equivalence, and devotes itself to exploring that idea. Maybe Jeff and Pierce's fraught relationship is due not to an extreme difference, but to an extreme similarity. Maybe we can see that, take it to some drama-rich places if we swap their positions within the group. It may well be that in the story we got, this is a false equivalence. What Jeff did probably isn't Pierce levels of bad. It is strange that it sees him instantly totally ostracized, but that's the conceit, and fully exploring the conceit is more important than the conceit being a perfect fit. Especially since, let's be honest, it would be near enough impossible to really sink Jeff to Pierce levels of villainy in a single episode, at least in such a way that he could reasonably be forgiven afterward. I think this impulse, writ large, of placing the idea above the need for a perfectly naturalistic ramp up to that idea is visible all throughout this third year. It's the kernel at the center of all those more surreal, more obviously conceptual episodes, but it's here too, from the start. And one result is character weirdness, maybe some degree of flanderization. So maybe moments like the above are the corollary of Season 3's wildness, are the price we pay for this willingness and ability to go anywhere. For some people, some fans, that cost is simply too great. But here's the thing. Sure, it's a little divisive. Sure, we lose a little something in the realism department. Sure, at times, our characters inch toward caricature and cartoonishness. All this is true, but it slaps. I'm sorry, it does. And all that applies to both Biology 101 and Season 3 as a whole. Maybe at times there's a lot you have to swallow for the episode for the season to come together, but it does come together, even at its most zany. And to really just hammer this home, I'll stop waxing poetic in the abstract and come back to the specifics of Biology 101. Because the other way this episode sums up Season 3 is that even when divorced from these meta-narratives, the show's golden age, its greatness, its slide toward absurdity, blah blah blah, it is just good, impressive, and impressively executed. Biology 101 is about biology, kind of.
I stand before you more highly evolved, Pierce Hawthorne.
I think we've evolved beyond reliance on a group at all. Aren't we just actual friends now, no matter where we are?
I stared at a crack in the ground of myself for years, and one day something grew from it. A single blade of grass.
Kane's presence here isn't just to provide narrative impetus for the downfall of Jeff Winger, it gives us the episode's theme. See, this is the third season. These characters have now known each other for years, and they're still falling into the same traps, the same misunderstandings and blow-ups they had been all along. 3 years in, what do they have to show for it? For much of the episode, it seems like not much. It seems like for all the bottle episodes, villain arcs, paintball, there's been no real progression, no evolution. But then, at the end, that shifts. Pierce lies to the group, sacrifices his own standing to throw Jeff a lifeline, which is taken and cemented with another little surprising gesture to close things out.
Sorry, Starface. You just lost your seat in my class.
We return to the status quo, but we only get back there through real, unexpected change. The result is one of the most interesting episodes for that Jeff-Pierce relationship I've touched on before. The result is an episode in which the Sprout breaks through. Maybe something of the show's earlier naturalism is sacrificed for this story, but it's replaced with something equally real. And hey, it's a shame that the rest of Season 3 rarely gives us this layered a Pierce. That is maybe the one respect in which this episode isn't totally reflective of its wider season. But apart from that, I think this episode succeeds, and succeeds in the same way the third season at large does. So, I don't want to suggest that this is everyone's favourite era of the show. On balance, I'm probably more of a Season 2 man myself, but it's inarguable that this is the greatest, the grandest, the most flashy, most confident period of Community's run, and that it holds a special place in a lot of hearts. Maybe in the show's urge to differentiate itself, to get wild, to kick back against the pressure to normalize, to place the idea above all else, resulted in some rough edges. Maybe that even contributed to the backstage shakiness that plagued this season's reception. A surprise hiatus occurred midway through the season's airing, and showrunner Dan Harmon was, of course, given the boot between this year and the next. If this premiere did have more fun and be less weird than the first 2 years combined, maybe ratings would have been better. Maybe none of that would have happened. But from my vantage point in 2023, I think Biology 101 shows us that while there may have been a cost of sorts, a price to pay for this era, this period of peak creativity, it is one that's well worth paying. Part 4. Community, History 101, and the gas leak year. You may not be aware, but Season 4 of Community was kind of a mess. The shock departure of the showrunner and creator Dan Harmon, his replacement by a writing duo of dubious credentials, together with the first phase of the core cast's partial exodus, resulted in a 13-episode run of fluctuating quality. Sometimes great, sometimes forgettable, sometimes just seeming to misunderstand altogether what had made those first 3 years so memorable. And uniquely, all of this is visible at once in the season's premiere episode, History 101. Let's jump into History 101, what it tells us about this show, how it works more widely, and how perfectly it prefigures the controversial season that'd follow, starting with the fact that it's not a bad episode. It isn't a great one, of course, not really, and we'll get to that soon, but it is decent. This episode sees the Greendale 7 attend their first day as seniors, the first day of their last year at Greendale, theoretically at least. Abed, who's famously not overly fond of change, is struggling with this, so Britta tells him to go to his happy place when he's feeling anxious about this finality. This is Abed we're talking about, of course, so that happy place is the show he's always talking about, his vision of their life at Greendale as a conventional TV sitcom.
This is my show, it's about me and all my friends on Abed TV.
But while Abed's resisting the end, Jeff's doing his best to hasten it. Turns out all he needs to graduate now is a history credit. Honestly, I'll never understand how American colleges work, but the school system was hacked. There's a problem with the class registers, so the dean tells everyone that anyone who wants to preserve their spot in History of Ice Cream has to compete in the Hunger Deans, a lavish, loosely themed series of tests, trials, and feats of strength.
Not the feats of strength.
Eventually, these two stories come together. Jeff lets go of the dean's balls, he helps break Abed out of one of those classic Abed imagination jams, the 7 end up in a regular history class, and that's about it. Here's the thing, there is plenty to like. At times, the dialogue feels like it's trying too hard to sound harmony, but there's no shortage of snappy lines.
Is all this for the history of ice cream?
They overbooked it, so it's first come, first serve now.
Just like real ice cream.
But most of the positives here come in those Abed TV sequences. We'll talk later about why these work conceptually, but they're also just really well put together. These parts of the episode pull off the multicam, studio sitcom look perfectly. The way History 101 uses unorthodox camera angles and blocking to suggest an open-fronted set, distorts the cast's familiar timing, has them wait for the laugh track, and injects the odd few Bazinga-esque artificial catchphrase reads.
Oh Lord, no!
All this is equal parts amusing and uncanny, and having Abed recast Pierce as Fred Willard is the icing on the cake. When Abed TV gets folded in on itself, when we swap out multicam mode for Greendale babies, the animation is spot on, and I'm not ashamed to say that this theme song very regularly gets stuck in my head. And the speech Jeff gives, or doesn't really, between Babytown and Abed TV, that feels like vintage Community. There is plenty to like, particularly in this side of the episode. But this is season 4, so it's not all sunshine and roses. You may have noticed that I didn't mention the Britta Troy C-plot yet, and that's because there's really not much to mention. After the two fan-favourite characters grew close last time around, Season 4 coupled them up properly, but whatever spark once lit up episodes like Virtual Systems Analysis never really reappears in this episode, or really throughout this season. Ironically, the only really involving part of the Britta Troy romance is its end.
I wish I had my own body back!
That being said, I do wonder how much this was Season 4's fault. Maybe we'd be right to lay the blame here at the new showrunners, the newer writers, but maybe these characters simply weren't as compatible as they seemed. Maybe those flashes of chemistry earlier on in the show were just that, flashes. I guess we'll never know. Speaking of squandered potential, the end of this episode sees the Dean move next door to Jeff, and the rest of this season does diddly squat with this. There's like one bit in one episode this whole season that half-heartedly brings this back, but it's such a feeble payoff that it taints the setup, exposes it, reveals the utter lack of purpose here. And hey, on that note, The Hunger Dean's story is the quintessence of Season 4. It's a misfire. It's a crudely fashioned approximation of the show's past pastiches. It's the aesthetic of Community with empty space beneath. And if you sat there wondering why I'm being so negative, what differentiates the Hunger Deans from similar referential set pieces in the show's past, its future even, ask yourself this. Why is it here? What purpose does it serve? A narrative one, obviously, it's the mechanism by which Jeff attempts to keep the group's history seats, but beyond that, why does the episode choose to move that story forward in this way? Because typically, Community does stuff like this for a reason. The claymation fantasy adventure in Abed's Uncontrollable Christmas wasn't made because claymation is fun and cool. Well, I guess that's part of it, but there, Abed regressed into the childhood mythology of Christmas because his messy adult reality had become untenable. His mum's choice to spend her holiday with a new family had shattered the narrative Abed had built around Christmas, what it meant, and so we're thrown into this Christmas fiction pastiche, this soupy hodgepodge of holiday characters, tropes, settings, and stories. Abed's sifting through this world, this composite space of public domain Christmas narratives, to try and find a replacement, a new meaning of Christmas, hence the story, hence the presentation, and so on. And sure, it isn't always quite that elegant, but there is always a reason, some interesting way in which the high-concept rigmarole speaks to our characters and where they are. Season 5's Meow Meow Beans episode comes to mind. The way the app's effects by the third act transform Greendale into a classic 70s sci-fi dystopia, ruled by empty niceties and emotional blackmail, is an extension of Jeff and Shirley's beef at the start.
Part of making sacrifices for my loved ones is not expecting my loved ones to make sacrifices.
Earlier in that season, the hot lava game is engineered and stretched out by Abed, both consciously and otherwise. Hot lava is a game that could go on indefinitely, and that's why it was picked here. The prolonging is the point, the staying in the fantasy, because when it ends, Troy goes. There's none of that in the Hunger Deans. The Dean wants Jeff to compete for him, dance with him, sure, but why frame that around the Hunger Games? What's the link? What's the reason? If anyone watching this has an answer, drop it down below, but I've got nothing. There's no point to the pastiche, and yeah, that'd be a recurring problem for this season. The other reason this part of the episode feels wrong is similar, actually. There's no reason for it conceptually, but there's also no real reason for it diegetically. Why would the Dean do this? As we've seen, Greendale is a place where all manner of wacky nonsense ends up happening, but there's always a ramp-up, always some nominal cause and effect. Perhaps everyone at Greendale is a level 7 susceptible, maybe they take things way too far, but things start sensibly. The first paintball fiasco was supposed to be a controlled affair, but the Dean made the mistake of offering too desirable a prize. Next time round, there's obscene amounts of wealth at stake, and the same thing happens with hot lava. Pillows and Blankets gets off the ground because of the potential world record. The election episode happens to try and get Sleepy Joe to drop by, the KFC spaceship affair was a PR stunt, and the Law & Order Yam trial tomfoolery is the result of our characters' desperate attempts to salvage their grades. It's never just abstract parodic mayhem. The stuff that happens here may seem unreal, but it's unreal in a real way. There is some logic to it. And we just don't get that here. The only thing History 101 gives us is the suggestion that the Dean did it to, dance with Jeff? And all this time and money spent, all this disruption to the school for that is just out of character for the Craig Pelton we'd seen beforehand. So, like all the worst parts of this fourth year, it feels wrong, like an ill-thought-out parody of Community that's missed the mark. The Hunger Deans is nothing. It doesn't work in the same way as Community's past referential showstoppers, and there's no reason for it. It's a semi-timely reference, and that's pretty much it. But The same cannot be said for Abed TV. It all tracks. Abed's happy place being this show fits perfectly with what we know about him already, as does his overuse of this new mental tool. This side of the episode works, it makes sense, it has a reason, and it speaks to Abed. This is a character well known for his aversion to change, his use of complex, imagined scenarios to resist or acclimatize to change. He's a character for whom TV, particularly classic sitcoms with their endlessly renewing status quos, is the lens through which life is approached. Abed's been using this lens to navigate his college experience. He's been viewing Greendale in part as his cheers, as his friends. But sooner or later, this was going to run into difficulties, because sooner or later he'd have to leave. And the first day of senior year understandably brings this problem into sharp focus. The way Abed gets sucked into his happy place, then the way that happy place breaks down, folds in on itself, is a really interesting and enjoyable visualization of Abed's journey to resolving this problem. First avoidance, then the unwelcome realization that time isn't something you can avoid, and finally Abed's use of this mental construct to reconcile himself with change. It's even more poetic in retrospect, acting almost as a premonition of Community's eventual finale, which also employed imagined versions of the show to have those last remnants of the Greendale 7 reach an acceptance of the group's end. Abed TV is all of this, so what better way to open the 4th season, the 4th and supposedly final year this group will spend at Greendale. This is great, and yet we find it lodged in an otherwise limp episode, opening an often limp season. That disconnect is disconcerting, but in a way it makes sense. When thinking about Season 4, it's important to remember that not everyone left. Harmon left, the writer's room changed, but that change wasn't total. Plenty of the minds behind plenty of classic episodes were still here. There were still people who really got the show, what it had been, what it could be, but they were rubbing shoulders, were led by people who maybe didn't so much. Danny Gonzalez has a video that touches on how strange a choice the studio's hand-picked replacement showrunners were for this show, which I'll link below, and the result was this, the so-called gas leak year. At once familiar and alien. We see all this in History 101. It exemplifies the contradiction and liminality of Season 4. It isn't Community, not quite, but it isn't not Community either. There are some points which feel familiar, feel solid, feel unreal in a real way, feel like a natural continuation of the show's halcyon days. And for a moment you forget about what's to come, about the puppets, about the everything is connected prequel episode that utterly misunderstands the appeal of the show's basic premise. But then we cut back to the Hunger Deans, and it all comes flooding back. Dan Harmon compared Season 4 to watching your family. And that's fucking stupid, obviously, but even as a viewer, that mix of the familiar and the alien in the gas leak year feels unnerving, wrong even. And if you are the guy who came up with this show, with these characters, watching this must have prompted some complicated emotions, feelings of jealousy, violation even. So maybe it isn't like that, but maybe it is like being split from your family, like seeing someone else take your spot, take your family to all the places you went to, take them to fancier, better versions of them even, but without knowing what it was you all enjoyed together about them. Even as you look on though, every now and then things click, and it looks just like old times. So there is a sort of synecdoche here. The experience of watching History 101 is the experience of watching Season 4. Not a bad experience per se, but often a perplexing one. There are great moments here, just as there are great episodes to come. This isn't Community, but this is still Community. It's at once the last gasp of that original Community, the last year with the full cast, the last year with our characters as students, and a strange aberration, a 13-episode intermission before that original Community starts up again. Watching History 101, you see all this at once, as Season 4 flickers between a worthy attempt to follow up the show's golden era and gas leak-induced mayhem. And at the very least, there's something interesting there, right? Maybe that's why, at the end of the day, I do have a soft spot for this episode. Why, in my mind, the good edges out the bad. For years, Community viewers have dismissed this 4th year, not altogether unfairly. Some have even followed after Harmon, talked about it with pure vitriol. The dominant narrative is that this whole thing is a write-off. Watching History 101 makes you wonder if maybe as a fanbase, as a community, we ought to rethink that just a little. Part 5. How Community Came Back from the Dead. Community's 4th season saw things fall apart. Not totally, mind, there were good bits in that 4th season, and it was rarely dreadful, but changes in the writers' room and NBC's firing of showrunner Dan Harmon had led to a clear step down in quality, and by the end of production, the show had even begun to lose core cast members. Add to this the dwindling viewership, and it looked like Community's future was shaky. It looked like the end. But as I expect most of you know, it wasn't. Community ran for 2 more seasons, both of which contain some of the show's all-time best episodes. See, as the last season 4 episodes aired in the spring of 2013, the viewers who'd stuck around waited for news, fearing the worst. But when that news came, it was a shock. Not only had Community been renewed for a 5th season, Season 4's showrunners were out, and largely thanks to the tireless efforts of Joel McHale, Jeff's actor, Harmon was back. Community had a chance at redemption, at rebirth, a chance to prove it should continue, and it grabbed a hold of that chance with both hands. The result was Season 5 Episode 1, Repilot. To quote a contemporary review, the show was back, and back to being itself. But how did one episode revive a floundering show? How did Harmon and co right the ship? And how did the show justify its continuation? Let's have a look, shall we? Repilot opens in a fantasy. We're shown an extravagant advert for Jeff Winger's new moral law firm before it crashes down to Earth.
I am the system. I consume humanity. There is no escape. Objection!
Jeff Winger, hero at law.
555, here.
Maybe you should have spent less money on special effects.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Francis Ford Repo Man.
This episode is exactly as self-aware as you'd expect from the name. Consider the conversion of the study room into a records room, and so, on one level, that opening is Repilot setting up a clear back-to-basics idea. Today, Community isn't claymation, or Western pastiche, or felt puppets, even. It's a show about a bunch of people in a community college. Or rather, who went to a community college. Fantasy, and the inherent artifice of television that Community became more and more consciously aware of, has fallen away. Forget the image you had of Community. For now, at least, this is the show. The slide into absurdity that began midway through Season 1 is reversed, and as the title suggests, we're back to the pilot. We're back to reality. We're back to a guy standing in rooms convincing people to do things and talking his way out of trouble. And the show lampshades this snapback to reality pretty clearly.
This is a 4-year process. We went in one end as real people and out the other end as mixed up cartoons.
Cool.
But on another level, the fantasy that seems to collapse as that ad ends is a simpler one. It's the fantasy that Jeff changed, that Greendale made him a better person. The basic reality of his character arc across the last 4 years, as represented by the strong moral underpinnings built into his failed practice, is coming into question. Was he stupid to believe in it? Were we? Repilot's cynical opening sequence suggests so.
It's a good place for good people.
It's a diploma mill. It turns idiots into bridge collapsers and Jeff Winger into an attorney that thought he could help people?
And so, all but resigned to that failure, Jeff takes a job from his old lawyer nemesis Alan to build a case against Greendale. When Jeff returns to the campus, it's hard to shake a sense of familiarity. From the now rare establishing shot to the score,
Another magic year at Greendale. Rank America's #2 community college.
to the fact that Jeff's at Greendale because of a lie.
You're here to save me, aren't you?
Yes.
The show seems to deliberately evoke the particular aesthetic of its first ever episodes. Before long, that evocation is made impossible to miss.
I see your value now.
Love it, why?
I see your value now. It's a callback to when we met first season, and me calling you your seasons is a callback to my first season dialogue.
After hearing Jeff's false justification for returning to school, the dean had called Abed, and what do you know, just like he had back at the study group's birth, Abed had invited the rest of the Greendale gang unbidden. Jeff isn't thrilled to hear this, and there is a sense, I think, in which the episode itself feels similarly. To continue a show about a community college after the characters have graduated is to yank its characters out of an assumed happily ever after and back into a land of problems to overcome and arcs to act out. Harmon's spoken in the past about Community's characters feeling like family to him, and you don't do that to family. Not unless you've got a good reason for it. There has to be a reason here. Anyway, with Abed's ringing up of the old gang, it becomes clear that the events of this episode will mirror those of the pilot, and not in a merely superficial way. Like the pilot, the study group members have arrived at Greendale with trouble in their personal lives. The stakes of Jeff's meddling are now more or less what they were 4 years ago. Innocent, struggling people have been thrown into the mix. Shortly after this unexpected reunion, we see the last remnants of Jeff's belief in his change, in the fantasy that Greendale helped is a good place for good people, fall apart.
See, that's the difference between you and Greendale, Alan. They wouldn't shred evidence.
A few moments later.
Why is there a big empty box on your desk that says Humphreys on it?
Those first echoes of Community's pilot hadn't gone unnoticed by Jeff, but it's this which gives Jeff the push he needs to embrace this sense of repetition, and recommit to the manipulator conman role he'd used and abandoned in that initial episode. And so, after Alan's scheme falters, Jeff's begins.
You just lost our client!
Yeah, but I can create 5 new ones.
So dusty. Let's get these on.
I forgot what it was like to be good at being bad.
The gambit is simple. Instead of an off-screen ex-pupil suing the school, Jeff must convince his ex-study group to, or rather must convince them to have that idea themselves.
It's just like that movie that you keep crowing about. You talking about Inception? That's right, Morty. This is gonna be a lot like that.
It doesn't take long at all for Jeff to get cooking. No, even after Alan busts in and reveals the ruse, all this is worryingly easy for Jeff. At moments, you'd forget the last 4 years happened at all. At moments, it seems like Jeff has. But when the scheme is exposed, when Jeff's trying to sell it to a now-aware Greendale 7, or Greendale 6, or actually Greendale 5 now, we get the most important line of the episode.
If Jeff didn't change, then Jeff is right. Case closed. Let's make some money.
As usual, Troy gets to the heart of the matter. That Jeff would do this, try to incept a lawsuit into his friend's brains, seems to suggest that Jeff hadn't changed. And if Jeff didn't change, then Greendale is pointless, and by extension, the show is pointless. The fantasy of Jeff Winger, hero at law, the crazy dream that a dirtbag can become empathetic, become good by connecting with others, isn't just an advert. And it isn't just a tongue-in-cheek nod to Community's increasing proclivity for the zany and the high concept. It is Community. It's the basic premise of the show. And if Jeff didn't get better, if it was just a fantasy, then what was the point of any of this? Is there one? Is there a point to any TV like this? Characters growing and changing every episode only for the status quo to inevitably, inexhaustibly return? When you've got to wring growth out every episode like a wet cloth, only to be doused again? Does it ever lead anywhere? Does anything ever really change? Can it? Or is it all just a big televisual hedonic treadmill going round and round to no end? So there's a lot at stake here. Personal growth, the concept of personal growth, the worth of the medium we're shown that growth in, an almost nihilistic cynicism is pounding at the door, begging to be let in. Hey, Harmon's back, what did you expect? But against all odds, that door stands firm. That nihilism doesn't get in. It doesn't seem like this at first. Those echoes of the pilot intensify. Structurally, Repilot's almost identical. The main body of the episode's made up of prolonged, bickery scenes of Jeff puppeteering the study group, with these broken up by him sneaking out for rendezvous scenes, Alan subbing in for Duncan, history repeating itself. It's things like this that suggest nothing had changed. But looking a little deeper into Repilot's moments of similarity, a different reading becomes visible. Yes, Chang is a teacher again, for the first time since that first year, stasis, but he's still bonkers. Change. Yes, the group quickly devolves into the same type of messy argument we'd seen 4 years back, stasis, but when things get real, all that falls away instantly.
Oh, it's okay to I am sorry.
Andre left again.
Change. Yes, Jeff had been playing his study group, getting them all on board with his planned litigation, Stasis, but it's clear in his anti-Alan outburst that he's doing this to benefit them just as much as himself.
That's for making the last 4 years happen, and now I get to make them unhappen for me and the only people I care about.
His friends are in a bad way, life-wise, and he instinctively realizes that matters, that now his actions with the whole legal case thing have to take into account their well-being. That thing Britta was trying to communicate to him back when they first met.
You put human beings into a state of emotional shambles for a shot at getting in my pants?
Why can't you see that for the compliment that it is?
You're unbelievable.
Now he knows it, instinctually, from the get-go. Change. It's easy to watch Repilot, catch all those echoes of Season 1, pick up on that suggestion of stasis, and lose faith in that fantasy too. But if you're paying attention, you'll see the episode's ending coming well before Jeff does.
These are the signatures of the 5 people that are crazy enough to care about this toilet. And tonight, I almost got them to sue it. Heed the warning!
The moments of similarity we see throughout Repilot aren't repetitions, they're inversions. This is not the pilot, despite the structure, despite the echoes. These are different people, and this is a different, better Jeff. He changed, so Greendale worked, so he won't sue the school, so this all mattered, because of course it did. And just like that, the cynical, down-to-earth tone the episode's opening so abruptly established falls away. We close with a table on fire, a hologram, and craziest of all, the band getting back together. They'd all graduated, but they re-enrolled? That doesn't happen, none of this happens, but we end embracing the fantastic, the artifice, the televisionality of it all. This, too, is the show. One thing Community's always had on its mind, from the start of Season 1 to the Season 6 finale, is media, is TV and film as a sort of modern pop canon. A canon at once removed from reality and providing the only key that matters for deciphering that reality. This stuff is important to Abed, it's important to Jeff, it's important, I'd wager, to Harmon too. And so it's no surprise at all, really, that Repilot's attempt to justify its own existence, Community's continuation, didn't stop there, that it also ended up justifying this preoccupation with its own medium, and implicitly that medium itself. So Community didn't come back from the dead with a whimper, or even with a bang. It came back with an existential crisis, one it emerged from by arguing in the strongest, most affecting, and most successful possible terms for its own existence. And that's also true beyond the narrative thematic layer we've been looking at in this video. The characterization here walks back some of that flanderization that had crept in during Seasons 3 and 4, and the cast is on top form.
You staged a robot fight?
At least the drugs I sell don't get slurped out of my belly button. That's only on Tummy Tuesdays. Oh, it's okay.
In Season 5, Community came back with, well, actually, let's leave it there. In Season 5, Community came back. The 12 episodes that followed weren't always perfect, but they were often great, and they were always odd and self-aware and striving to mean something in the same way we see here. So Repilot wasn't just a shot in the arm, it was a rediscovery of and a recommitment to the promise of that original pilot, of that still essential premise, that people are better together and that people together are better.
They love when you shuffle the words around.
This conclusion is getting near Winger levels of glibness, sorry. But I really like this episode. I really like what it represents, to the point that getting to write about this episode was a big part of the reason I decided to make this series in the first place. And I'm just doing my best to get all that across. I hope I've succeeded. Part 6, Ladders, the many facets of Community's last start. Okay, let's do this one last time. What's streets ahead about the Season 6 premiere? Right. Previously in this project, I've always tried to keep focused, investigate one thing, one aspect of one premiere per section. The pilot is a better and more community episode than people tend to grant. Anthropology 101 is unmatched as a pivot point for the show's identity. The Season 3 premiere shows there's a cost to the sense of wacky excess the original run ends with. History 101 works impressively well as a case study for what works and what really doesn't about the gas leak here. And Repilot functions on every level as a passionate argument for the show and for its medium. That kind of thing. I am kinda gonna do that here too, But I'm also kinda not, because I don't want to approach ladders through just the one lens here. No, I want to try out a few different ones, starting with Ladders, the latter-day masterpiece. Ladders is absolutely one of my favorite episodes, and that is unqualified praise. I don't mean it's one of my favorite episodes of the show's latter years, or that given the circumstances, the reduced cast, it's good for what it is. None of that. It is simply one of the episodes I look forward to the most on rewatch, up there with the show's golden age classics like Paradigms of Human Memory or Remedial Chaos Theory. I love Ladders. For one, the story's got a great concept. Greendale's finally started falling apart, and it needs help from outside its own little bubble of crazy nonsense to sort itself out. But can it do this without losing what makes it special? The driving force of this story is the introduction and then exit and then reintroduction of Frankie Dart, played by the wonderful Paget Brewster, who would of course go on to join the gang for the rest of the season. Her character's right at the center of this story. Her position shifts from threat to hero to meddler, and then at the end to savior, in a way that gives Ladders a real momentum. Another thing I like about this story is the way it takes advantage of its place in the show. We're 6 years into Community at this point, and Ladders knows it. Tells its story with zany abandon. Ladders knows we're deep enough in the show, knows we're so tuned into Greendale's arrhythmic heartbeat that we don't need to worry about suspension of disbelief or anything like that, knows we can push Greendale further than ever before. So the episode makes use of that extra season 6 runtime to go beyond where a similar earlier story might have stopped. To me, the confrontation in the speakeasy feels like it'd be the wackiest point a version of this story from, say, season 2 would have got to. The fallout over Abed would have been the low point, but here, no, we carry on. Icarus-like, ascending to some truly demented heights before Greendale's lunacy comes to a grinding halt.
Cut to everyone on campus getting as drunk as they want montage.
I'm as high as hell, and you're a couple of I'm as high as hell. We want to see the ladders, Professor, go higher!
So the story's got a good concept, and it's self-aware enough to really plumb the depths of the Greendale setting, but it's also well crafted. The beginning, the tragedy of the roof frisbees forgotten by the Save Greendale committee, picks up very smoothly from where season 5 had left this world. And the recurring montage bit isn't simply funny, it's also some really neat storytelling. We can view it as a clear through-line for Abed's arc, tracking the way his sympathies bounce between Jeff and Frankie's positions on fixing Greendale, and the way those positions ultimately converge. Lastly, and maybe most importantly, this is a hilarious episode. I don't think there's another episode that makes me laugh like this every time, and sure, it's easy for me to just say that, so let me show it. I've cut together a montage of all this episode's laugh-out-loud moments, and if you haven't all suffocated to death from laughter by the end, I'll eat my hat.
Okay, if they blame us for this, let me take the heat. I'd never see the inside of a cell.
I've been reliving this day over and over for 1,000 years. Where's Shirley?
You didn't tell him.
I was waiting until we were all together. Abed's not comfortable with CHANGE.
Hey, screw you, I can spell. Are any of you white people noticing what's happening to this group? Do Abed and I need to be concerned?
You have my word. As leader of the white people, there's no cause for alarm.
Say hello to new Shirley.
Okay, I'll just have a seat and...
No! Our friend used to sit there.
She spun off.
I'm sorry. What about here?
Yeah, I guess that's okay.
If I had a magic wand, I would use it to make sure Greendale never had to grow up. Would also probably use it to cut the magic wand class that I noticed is actually offered here, as well as VCR repair, a class called ladders, and when is it okay to shake a baby?
Okay. Great seeing you, Professor.
Yeah. Who in the crazy bitch? Did you see her binder? Huh. Ha! Pretty nondescript.
Temporal. Mutation. English, Doc. Simply put, Mr. President, in 12 hours, these dinosaurs will become...
Mind if I sit here?
Dinosaurs.
Frankie's taking her to the campus. She canceled ladders, she's banning substances, she wants to shut down Shirley's sandwiches. She called Annie a bitch. She implied I was a bitch. She implied Annie was a stuck-up bitch who thinks she's better than everyone.
She was nice to me. In fact, we kind of got along.
Abed, are you sure she wasn't actually being sweetly condescending? I make a movement that we form a separate, secret committee. I second Britta's motion, not movement.
I third Annie's number 2ing of the movement Britta made. Our mission, to preserve the real Greendale. Oppose Frankie or drink. Whatever's easiest.
Abed.
Yeah?
What are you doing? Someone told me you were sweeping, straightening clocks. Why are you cleaning that sign? I gave you a list.
The list felt pretty similar visually. I can't picture a montage cutting from me verifying Diane's invoice to me emailing confirmation to Diane.
But a montage is what, Abed?
It's a movie apologizing for reality.
And we are where?
Reality?
And what do people do here?
They email Diane.
Raid!
Is this what you guys want?
Who tattled?
In what world do you see this as covert enough to require tattling? You built a bar in a school. There was lumber involved.
Police and the government touch my cock. I'm as high as hell. I'm as high as hell. The police and the government.
This is my fault.
Obviously not. It's my fault.
It's my fault.
Guys, it's my fault.
It's my fault. It's my fault. It's my fault. It's my fault. It's my fault.
Someone needs to say I'm in charge, and that person is me. That's my decision.
Wait, what?
I'm sorry?
Who talks like that? Why would anyone hire someone so pompous? Word of advice. Change your personality or start looking for companies run by insane people.
Don't hire this woman!
We're sorry.
Hey guys, you might be wondering why this bit's in here, but I promise you it is hilarious with the scene's original audio, which YouTube wouldn't let me put in here. Thanks, YouTube.
Just wait and see.
Alright, solely because I don't actually want to eat my hat, it's like wool and also my head would get cold, I'll assume there are some of you left after that, and continue with the video. As I hope I've brought out then, one of the most interesting parts about Ladders is just how good it is, how well plotted the story is, how tightly written and effortlessly delivered those jokes are. But that isn't the only interesting part, so let's move on. How else can we approach Ladders? Ladders, the last rebirth. Ladders doesn't just kick off the show's last season, it also kicks off the show's last era, ushers in one last take on Community. Because in a lot of ways, Season 6 feels unique. Tonally, this is the goofiest and least constrained season in years. The show takes itself less seriously than ever, and there are pros and cons to this. On the one hand, some of the characters shift wildly, and the Flanderization goes further than ever. The more you think about Jeff this year, the sadder it gets, and this is kind of a rough year for Britta too. Hey, maybe there's a video there. But the flip side of this is that the show's more willing to play around with far-fetched elements and plot beats. The cousin marriage, the relatively high-concept story structure tension we see in the Giant Hand episode, and yes, the Ladders professor shotgunning a tinny and going higher and higher. Community's finally at a place where it knows it isn't real, it knows we know it isn't real, and it knows we're fine with it knowing that, if you know what I mean. This acceptance of its own fictionality means the wackiness of these storylines is dialed up, yes, but it also means that especially on the peripheries of the show, in bit parts and credit scenes, realism falls away entirely, and the kind of garbled, referential stock figures and modes normally reserved for Abed's brain peek through into the show's main continuity, until at times, it almost feels like Rick and Morty light. Hey, maybe there's a video there. Not everyone likes that kind of thing, sure, but it does add a distinctively playful flavor to these last 13 episodes. Besides this, Season 6 makes plenty of other adjustments to the Community formula, like the cast shuffle. We'd seen the show try this last year too, albeit less successfully, with Hickey, Chang, and a returning Duncan trying and maybe failing to make up for the losses of Pierce and Troy, and now there's another juggling of character traits to try and create an interplay that's as effective as that first Greendale Sevens. We might view Frankie as a composite of lost character traits. Like Pierce, and indeed Hickey, she's less pop culture literate than the rest of the group. Again, like Hickey and indeed Duncan, she works for the school. Like Shirley, she brings a slightly more senior, caring, female perspective to the table, and she's the first real straight man figure we've had since Jeff and perhaps Britta's early Season 1 incarnations. As Dan Harmon put it in this episode's commentary, she's there to counterbalance the lunacy. Frankie's not the only change. Elroy's presence and the increased prominence of Chang and the Dean are other important elements of this cast rebalancing. But I think she is the most successful one. By the end of the year, the show realizes this too.
You know what I think everybody should do? As a humble outsider that came in and nailed it?
Perhaps in these last few years, Community did face a crisis of cast depletion, but if so, this is the show steering into that skid. Season 6's new lineup doesn't feel like an attempt to recapture a lost dynamic. It is its own thing, in a way Season 5's kinda wasn't so much. And last but not least, Season 6 doesn't just feel different, it looks different too. For one, this is the brightest and most colourful the show's ever been. I mean, that's how it seems to me. While I was writing this section, I stumbled across the fact that a lot of people think this season looks darker, which I just cannot see. I mean, I am a little colorblind, maybe that's some of it, but to me, this is the warmest the show's ever felt visually. In part, the different look is because this season saw exterior shots filmed at the LA Community College, the real-life Greendale building, for the first time in years. It also looks different because the sets themselves are different. The move from NBC to Yahoo screen meant all these familiar locations had to be recreated in a new studio. Sometimes this change is very visible. In universe, the pillars in the new cafeteria set are there thanks to that Frisbee-induced collapse, but really they're there, really that whole roof collapse opening came about because this set was built in a basement. So, you know, props to Harmon and the gang for turning architectural lemons into engaging narrative lemonade. Season 6, then, is a different feeling show, shot elsewhere with a partially different cast. It almost feels like a soft reboot, and it's Ladders that does the rebooting, destroying the school, building those new sets, bringing in Frankie, this year's X Factor, spinning Shirley off, setting up more dangling threads. It is true that a lot of this was born of necessity, but I don't think that should detract from the episode's success. And Ladders thinks this too. After all, what is this episode if not Community telling the audience, yes, things change. Yes, cast members may leave, network deals may fall through, ceilings may collapse, the future may be uncertain, the steps we take to tackle these changes may be unfamiliar and confusing, but that doesn't mean it's over. Or, in the words of the Season 6 GOAT herself,
as far as what I represent about your show, I wouldn't give me or anyone else that kind of power. Good shows change.
So that's another way of viewing Ladders, but Ladders contains multitudes, so let's switch it up one last time. Ladders, The Long Goodbye. Community didn't move to Yahoo specifically for one final season. 6 seasons and a movie was never the plan. On paper, at least, there was every possibility for more Community. Now, for a few reasons, that wouldn't end up happening. The actors' contracts were all up, the show took a huge chunk out of the Yahoo screen budget, but no one would have known that, movie notwithstanding, this would be curtains for Community ongoing into production. Or so you'd think. And yet, while yes, this episode does feel like a beginning, it also feels like the beginning of an end. Fans have speculated for years that even before Ladders started filming, show creator Dan Harmon was ready to say goodbye. His other project was taking the world by storm, Yahoo only picked up the show at the 11th hour, almost literally, so one narrative that seems to have taken hold online is the idea that when that renewal did come to fruition, Harmon had already accepted Community's end, and only saw this 6th year through for the fans, and to fulfill that adoptive prophecy.
6 seasons and a movie!
Before we get too carried away, it's important to note that at the time, Harmon denied this, telling The Wrap no, he hadn't come into the 6th year envisaging it as the end. So I'm not saying this fan narrative is true. But I am saying you can see why people think it is. See, we already talked a little about the tone of Season 6, but one thing I didn't mention was the sense of melancholy that runs through this last year. It is clearer towards the season's tail end. Characters start to accept, settle into where they're at life-wise, even if those places aren't perfect, are barely better than where they started out. Think Britta with her awful parents, or Jeff realizing he's in his career of alcohol-fueled mediocrity for the long haul.
I finally know in my heart that I would literally be the last one of us here.
The end of Season 6 leans hard into this. The last 4 episodes in particular are practically an extended finale. I mean, just look at the way the RV episode ends, soundtracked by a sweetly nostalgic Season 1 musical cut. And this is to say nothing of the eventual big finish, emotional consequences of broadcast television, and the bittersweet, slow releasing of our cast.
You coming back, Elroy?
I think so. Probably. Maybe.
But the beginnings of this mood are visible, I think, in Ladders. Even as it kicks off this bright new year, even as it reboots the cast and their dynamics one more time, there is something of a farewell tour energy to this premiere. Practically all of the show's minor background characters make an appearance, and so many of this episode's details are self-referential deep cuts. Chang calling Frankie Slater, the computery college sign, the Nathan Fillion custodian appearance, the I'm as high as hell track played at the end, even the concept of Ladders class itself expands from a momentary season 3 gag.
Welcome to Ladders.
As with Repilot, we channel the show's past, but here, it feels less like we're doing so to reopen that book than we are to take one last glance backward before it closes. And there are points which feel straightforwardly like premonitions of that book's closing.
Is Shirley gone? Did she spin off?
Nobody spins off in real life, Abed. Shirley went to look after her dad in Atlanta. She'll be back.
Probably. Maybe.
So who knows how far this was a conscious decision on the part of the show's crew? Who knows how much of the Season 6 melancholy, how much of Ladders' long goodbye is retrospective fan projection? All I know is that I can't watch Ladders, I can't see this start without also seeing the end. Is there a conclusion we can draw then? How can we fit together Ladders as exemplary Community episode, Ladders as new spin on Community, and Ladders as long farewell? I think the only thing we can truly take away is that even this late into the show's run, it still isn't content to be one thing. To me, this multifaceted nature is what defines Ladders. Whichever individual box you try to put it into, bits jut out, and indeed, it's what defines Season 6. There are plenty of latter-day masterpieces this year. There's a lot of newness, new locations, new recurring characters, new relationships with that fourth wall, new dynamics, new mysteries. There's so many moments when we see our characters' paths gently diverging. And there's so much else besides. There are probably ways in which this amorphousness holds the show back, but it is something that keeps me coming back to this episode, this season too. This last year feels creatively relaxed. It feels like any and every idea, regardless of whether they fit the setting or the format, got a shot at making it on screen. Sometimes those don't work, but most of the time they do. And finale may be accepted. I don't think that's ever clearer than here, in Ladders. Every long-running show changes as it goes on. As year after year, staff members and budgets change, characters get adapted to better suit their actors, and viewer numbers shift. Every long-running show changes, but few in this genre, I think, change as much as Community did between 2009 and 2015, and few embrace that changing as much. Looking at these 6 season premieres has shown us how much the show changed over each broadcast hiatus, but we've also seen, for instance in Part 2's discussion of English as a second language and Pascal's Triangle Revisited, how much Community changed during the course of its seasons. A remarkable gap separates the pilot from contemporary American poultry, separates Anthropology 101 from that season's conclusion too. I encourage you all to form your own conclusions from the episodes, themes, and trends I've discussed here. But what I've taken away from this is an appreciation for that love of change, for the way Community steered into opportunities and skids alike. And as much as I've talked about Harmon's impact, and as uninspired as much of Season 4 is, I don't think this is simply the Dan Harmon effect, purely because there's relatively little of this in Rick and Morty. No, this is specific to Community. It isn't any one person, it is Community that's streets ahead. I've very much enjoyed working on this series off and on over the past 15 or so months. It's been a fun way to kind of do a whole show retrospective without doing a whole show retrospective. As always, I'd like to thank all of you for watching this, and do let me know what you thought down below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, or I'll activate the device. And I'd really love to make more videos this length, ones which are all new. So if you'd be interested in seeing those, the biggest thing you can do to help me make that possible is check out my Patreon or YouTube membership systems. You do of course get a whole host of benefits in return for your money, like exclusive videos, information on what's coming next, and plenty more, but long term, the less reliant on YouTube's monetization I am, the longer and better these videos can get. So a colossal thank you to everyone already on board, the heroes whose names you're seeing now, especially Hanan, Daniel Goldhorn, Karen Kuhlman, Magath, Ryan Emily, Something Capitalism Bad, Thomas R, and Weirdy Beardy. And I'll see you all soon.
Subbing to this channel's not the hardest thing, it's true. Cause when someone makes banger content, there ain't nothing else to do.
I'm subbing a pillar of garbage, subbing a POG. I'm subbing to pillar of garbage, please subscribe to me. I'm subbing to pillar of garbage, subbing to POG. I'm subbing to pillar of garbage, please subscribe to me.